Hey there, guys. How you doing? I'm Julian. I'm just on here to talk a little bit today with CreDA, with Fakhul from CreDA. We're here to talk a little bit about, kind of where the state of things in regards to credit, online privacy, crypto privacy, things like that are going. And so we've got Fakhul on here today to kind of talk a little bit about that. So welcome, Fakhul.
Hello, Julian. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Really great to have you too. Yeah, it's kind of like an interesting topic. I know it's something that maybe was pretty popular a few years ago, but then when kind of DeFi swept in and DAOs and NFTs kind of took over, it kind of like reshuffled the deck, in terms of technology. But this is kind of becoming like a big point now. I know a few companies that are all trying to kind of build in a similar direction. A lot of different takes. A lot of people focusing on, cross-chain transactions, inter-wallet transactions, using it, especially relevant today with so many hacks and bridge issues going on. I think it's something extremely relevant. So why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and kind of how you kind of see this playing out.
Yeah, sure. So, my personal background is, I've spent the last 15 years in the traditional financing space at Morgan Stanley. And, I spent a lot of time helping integrate our crypto offering for institutional investors. And I think whilst there, I learned more and more about blockchain and DeFi in particular, and just really saw a lot of the opportunities it provides and decided to make the leap of faith in the last few months, and here I am. And yeah, CreDA. So what is CreDA? So CreDA is short for Credit Data Alliance, and what we firmly believe is that for Web3 to truly be successful, in terms of mass adoption, it needs trust. So we think, right now the trust layer is missing. So what we're looking to do is we see ourselves as a new type of credit agency that is changing the way people are able to build credibility online for the purpose of accessing finance, which, the traditional financing system cannot do. And I think, if you just look at some of the numbers, up to 4 billion adults worldwide are considered underbanked. It's a crime. So DeFi, one of the key proponents of DeFi was it could solve that issue because, you don't need to perform KYC. It's very easy. You just need a phone, download the wallet, go onto an app, DeFi protocol, take out a loan, happy days. And I think it's really exploded in recent years. And, there's a lot of projects have popped up, and, Unifi Protocol is a great example of that. But where we see DeFi as lacking, or where there's a real opportunity cost right now, is the high barrier to entry for people to participate. And that is, most loans, all loans are heavily over collateralized, which means that unless you're rich to begin with or you have a lot of assets, you can't necessarily take that loan. So what CreDA is trying to do is we're trying to allow users to be able to build up credit online without necessarily having to perform any sort of KYC. So what we do is we look at a user's digital identifier and their associated wallets, and we're able to scan their assets, their activity, and pretty much their entire history on chain, because most things are open source, and derive a credit score. And really what we're trying to do is give credit where credit is due. If you're credit worthy, if you're reliable, you demonstrate trust, then we think you should be able to access the financial system.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like an easy part of the industry that I think could have a lot of long-term success, where you've got a ton of data that's out there. These nodes or wallets are collecting tons of data on transactions that are out there. It's just waiting to be mined. And after mining that data, you can drive all kinds of functions from there. There have been a lot of tokens built around that model, I know, in the past. But when you talk about credit history, I think that there's a lot to say there, and there have been a lot of companies out there for a long time talking about, just like history. How long has this account been active? How long has it been around? And I think that just things like that are kind of interesting, right? Those are kind of interesting topics. And to build off of that, to kind of leverage it into credit is certainly something that I think is very interesting. For me, I kind of think that there's a lot of potential here in terms of developers, companies, and things like that. But I think I'm really interested to hear where you think that this path leads. We've seen where credit agencies go in the traditional finance space, right? Where does it go here? Like, what do you think like the future looks like for decentralized credit, things like that?
Yeah, great question. So I think, if you think about traditional credit agencies, it works when they have the ability to mine a ton of information, and it's very easy to KYC individuals, harness their data, and generate scores. They pretty much rely on data. The problem is, the the global world doesn't necessarily work like that. You have rural communities, developing nations where it's difficult for individuals to just access agencies that will provide a form of KYC or a bank account. So where I think DeFi and the blockchain in general has a huge advantage is a couple of things. The first and foremost is it's location agnostic. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Everyone is the same on a chain, which is really important because what you may not know is traditional credit agencies, your local credit bureau, let's say Experian for argument's sake, would give you a different score in the US versus if you was to get a score from Experian in the UK, which is where I am. And it's just because of the way they work and the local regulations, etc. Also, it takes them a long time to generate scores on the chain, and we're able to actually recalculate a user score on a daily basis. But also, you know, with DeFi, you can start fresh, you can start new. That's the great thing about the blockchain. Everyone's kind of starting from scratch and trying to right the wrongs historically. So, you have the ability to do away with discriminatory information. We don't care what's your gender, your sexual orientation, your location, your ethnic background. You can do away with all of that. But also, where there's more interesting applications is, you can very specifically target those unbanked individuals because there is no longer that, hey, it's too difficult to get this data, it's too difficult to churn it, it's difficult for us to monetize it. That's not necessarily true in this space. There's loads of companies where they're, to your point, open source public information that is readily available. And we're speaking to some really interesting projects on the ground that, when they look at the unbanked community as a local microlender, then they don't necessarily care, who's this individual, what's their credit history, how much money do they have in their account. They look at more interesting things like, hey, how often do you use your phone? What sort of applications do you have on your phone? Because that's a way of demonstrating. If you can pay for the cellular service, it means you have some sort of income. They look at things like geotagging information. So what are crop yields, predicted rainfall, what sort of farming land does that individual have? What's great is, in this space, you can consume all that data and you can generate scores that take everything into account, but can also be flexible depending on the user itself. So a lender in the DeFi space who may be looking to face off to yourself, Julian, may not care about that sort of geotagging information. And so their score and their lending or their risk appetite to yourself may be predetermined or more traditional factors. But when they're dealing with a farmer in the middle of nowhere, they can specifically look at things like that. So I think, the main thing where this space is going is, I think it's going to be all inclusive. And it will, and honestly, I sincerely believe, and I wouldn't have made this leap of faith if I didn't think that this could solve, or at least be a huge step in solving the issue of the unbanked. And just to finish there, Oxford Economics did a recent study, and they said if someone could solve the unbanked issue, it's about 250 billion in global GDP a year. That's not the size of Vietnam. So there's a great market there. There's plenty of space for new entrants in the market. But I think just that ability to start from scratch is really going to help, because you can create a model that works for everyone. It doesn't need to be focused on a specific industry or a demographic.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. It kind of has some like undertones of privacy and kind of what I think really, I talk about this a lot. The cypherpunk manifesto is kind of like where the industry is kind of probably likely born from, debatably born from, right? And in terms of banking regulations, things like that, privacy, KYC, all of that stuff kind of falls right in line with kind of what we're all here doing. And I think that at the end of the day, a lot of people lose sight of like, why are we building in crypto? Like, why are we actually doing this? There actually is a good reason for blockchain, / crypto itself. And I think that you're kind of touching on that. And I think that's a pretty cool aspect. It's a pretty cool angle that I don't think a lot of companies remember or keep in the front of their mind. I think that was a little more popular back in 2018, maybe not so much now, but that's fine. So yeah, I totally hear you on the discrimination aspect, privacy aspect, things like that. It's like, it's like it's like cash is non-discriminatory, and that's one of the things that it has, right? You walk in, to a 7-Eleven with a $5 bill. It doesn't matter who you are. It's a $5 bill. You walk in there with $5 worth of credit. Well, then that could matter, Then suddenly, well, who's it by? Who's it issued by? Who are you? What are you doing here? Things like that kind of come up. And I think you kind of lose the privacy that comes along with, traditional fiat currencies when you get there, but trying to bridge the gap with, crypto and, some kind of credit agency and things like that, I think are very interesting. For me, something I'm super interested in is actually credit history as it applies to developers. We've seen a lot of companies become multi-billion-dollar entities overnight. Some of them completely anonymously. And, these are people that are coming in without history, that are building up things. They may be using auditing firms and things like that are kind of harder to understand, or not using them at all. And I think history counts there. And I think that for me, I really like to see, things like, hey, how many smart contracts, or how long has this developer or this address been deploying smart contracts? What kind of history do they have? And frankly, I could even see that being a track record. Like, hey, like there's like an address associated with, whatever, like Certic or something like that just deploys the addresses. And then they can say, hey, we've been deploying smart contracts for 5 years, and we have never had a critical hack or loss of funds. And that's kind of interesting information that is available on chain, generally speaking. But I don't think that a lot of people are tackling that. And I know that that's something how we differentiate ourselves. We've got started as a community. We've been around for a bit over 4 years now. We've been building, bootstrapped this whole way. And I would love to take credit for that. I would love to take credit for the fact that we deployed our first smart contract in 2018. I'd love to take credit for the fact that we've never had a critical breach or a community loss of funds like that. I would love to take credit for like how we've kind of built these things out and kind of grown along with the industry, where some of these very large entities can't say the same thing. They may be bigger, they may have more liquidity, they may have more developers, but they haven't been doing it as long. And I think that there is some relevance there. I think that's something that I would love to see come out, and something that I think even to some extent Etherscan has been doing a little bit of this, trying to integrate some of their own aspects. But I think a more independent side of that is needed. And with the number of chains that are out there and explorers and data, there's a ton of value there. So I definitely see that as a pretty important piece of where things go. So yeah, I think that probably a good topic just to kind of talk about is what about bridges? There's been some interesting news as of late around bridge technology. There have been some issues, and I think when you talk about trust, it's a perfect example. You can't have a bridge without trust, but frankly, you can't have any smart contract without trust. A person has to write it, and you have to trust either how to read that smart contract or trust that somebody else does. So besides that, a bridge actually requires some kind of clear trust here. How do you guys plan with that? Where do you guys think that online or digital, I suppose digital credit applies there?
I think it's a very important point. I think we talk a lot about a credit score, but really I kind of see the CreDA score and more in general, it's more about a user's credibility. And that's not just the user, but the protocols they interact with, the protocols themselves. So the way we've approached it at CreDA is we consume a lot of information, like billions of different data points. And when we're constructing our score, it's looking at wallets. So it could be a individual's wallet or an exchange wallet. It could be a protocol's wallet. It could be a bridge wallet. And the way we approach it is we say, hey, what is the behavior of this individual or the protocols this individual's participated in or the contribution this individual's given? And we use that to help construct our score. And the reason why we do that is because we think, it isn't just purely what sort of assets do you have? How often have you paid back a loan? That matters. We actually think your behavior should also count. And the reason why is because people want to remain anonymous, or at least pseudo-anonymous in this space. So you need a level of trust without necessarily knowing who that person is behind the camera. So to your point, we do look at different protocols, and we are starting to consume information around, what sort of security audits have they have, how many breaches have they had, are they small, medium, advisory warnings, major hacks, etc. And we kind of use all of that to construct a credit score. First and foremost for an individual, and there are some other players in the game that are doing this, where they're actually ranking different protocols based on how they've performed over the years. So take Unifi as an example. Since 2018, you guys have never had a major hack, which is great. And I think you guys have like dozens and dozens of smart contracts. That's going to be important, right? Because a lot of protocols in this space, some are very open about who the team is behind them, such as yourselves. Others aren't, right? Look at Magic or Luna. There's a few out there where you just don't know who those people are. So how can you trust them? And the only way you can really trust them is, one, you can look at the code, or two, you can look at their track record. How long have they been around? Who's engaging? How are the underlying assets split? Is it governed by a DAO? How decentralized is it? But really, at the heart of it, code is king in this space. So, to your point, there are some really big protocols out there, but they've had these big hacks. Axie, Poly Network.
Yeah.
So size doesn't necessarily equal trust.
It doesn't.
And credibility.
It doesn't. Absolutely not. There was earlier in my crypto career, I was exposed to a pretty big. There was a pretty big hack of a centralized exchange at the time, the largest.
I remember.
And I remember when that happened. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. This is a terrible thing that happened. And I was thinking about it like that, like putting myself in the same shoes as the operators of the exchange. And then I started thinking it through, and I'm like, wait a second, this isn't a decentralized exchange where I can see the code and say, yes, I agree with this. this is a decentralized entity. So how do I know they were hacked? Frankly, you don't.
You don't know.
And frankly, this is a terrible thing to say coming from somebody that's building in the space and expecting people to use our products, kind of challenging. I don't know that you can be hacked. I actually don't know if that even exists, because at the end of the day, I don't think they can prove, and has come out since, I don't think you can prove that the owners, the creators of that company, didn't just hack it themselves. Due to the privacy nature and anonymity nature of the space, it's kind of hard to kind of say like what actually happened. And I think that sometimes developers kind of lose sight of that like, they have to stand behind the things that they build, and when they put their name on these things, that's a representation, and their reputation is tied to it. And I think that's important, and that's kind of a big aspect of what credit in our space can do, is it can attach a reputation to an individual developer. And having a public individual developer is great. Being able to attach smart contracts to their reputation, I think, is great. And I think that's helpful to everybody. So for me, I think there's kind of like three aspects then of credit agency in our space, right? We have credit of the individual. That's cool. So they can get a loan. They can borrow XYZ from whoever, maybe from token platforms, DAOs, whatever. The second piece that we've been talking about here is kind of the credit agency as it applies to a company, kind of like their history, their performance, how they've acted as a player in the space as a public entity over time. I think that's super interesting. But you know what? Something occurred to me as we've been talking, and there really is a third kind of credit agency, and that's basically when you participate in DeFi, you add liquidity. When you participate in staking, you're adding some liquidity, you're providing tokens there. You are lending those tokens, or you're injecting those tokens into a platform. When you bridge tokens into a wrapped version, you're exposing yourself. What is the exposure on wrapped ETH? It's practically zero, but it's not zero. It's not zero. And so at the end of the day, wrapped ETH is a smart contract. Using a bridge is using a smart contract. As the Axie thing has shown, a lot of tokens were wrapped using this bridge. And so there were people that were exposed to that wrapping contract. And I think it'd be really interesting to see a credit agency tackle that and say, hey, what is my exposure? What percent of my assets are currently exposed? And what is the risk there? Like, I have wrapped ETH. The exposure there is probably quite high, but I know that the risk is, for all intents and purposes, negligible, but it's not zero. And I think that's something people often forget, is when they're providing liquidity, yes, they get an LP token back, but there's flash loans coming in. We've seen flash loan attacks. We've seen all kinds of different attacks on various LPs. We've seen people injecting or minting other tokens and injecting it into the LP, all kinds of things. It'd be great for the individual to also see what credit not only are they eligible for, but what credit are they currently providing to these platforms, right?
No, I agree.
About it.
I completely agree. I think one from for giving them that credibility, because really, if you're participating in that space as like providing liquidity, then in our minds, you're contributing to that platform. And interestingly, it's actually something we scan. So, if you were to come and connect your wallet to our platform, our Oracle is smart enough to say, hey, these are actual assets you have in a decentralized wallet, versus this is where you've staked in a liquidity or a mining pool. What sort of different assets do you have? But I agree, right? One of the biggest concerns that the industry has, and we've seen it, right? Poly Network, wasn't that long ago. Now the Ronin Network, is these cross-chain bridges where they're wrapping. It's one, it's, to your point, there's a certain level of a central point of failure around, someone owns that wallet ultimately. You can have multi-sigs, but how do you control that and how do you monitor that? But also for some reason they just seem to be quite easily exploited. Is it negligence? Is it a lack of expertise in the space? who knows? Smart people than me are looking at it, but ultimately, it's it should contribute to the reputation and the credibility of that protocol.
I think for me though, which I totally agree with what you're saying. I think for me, maybe from my perspective, which could be totally wrong. For me though, from my perspective, I feel people don't know that there's exposure there. They don't know that they're actually lending tokens to this smart contract. They don't know that they've actually not only that they've provided a line of credit to this bridge that they're maybe not getting a great interest rate on, if any interest rate sometimes. And there's exposure. And so they're taking on exposure for oftentimes nothing. And that's part of why I think bridges is a challenging discussion, because you're asking people to take on some increased exposure in multiple ways. You're asking them to interact with several smart contracts, each of which could have a potential failure point. You're asking them to interact with a centralized entity, often a node or server or what have you. And then you're asking them to interact with this new blockchain itself, which could have its own potential issues. And then you're asking them to interact with some new token, some wrapped version of that token or something. And there's, even on the most secure bridge, there's an ask there. You are asking for some kind of credit, and I think that it does expose people to something, and I think it's good for people to be aware of that. Good for the community to be aware of that.
Agree, and I think there is a lack of education in the space, especially as we've seen more and more new players. Retail individuals. They got attracted by the Doge coins and these crazy APYs that we're seeing. And I agree, most don't necessarily know around the concerns that you should have when you're dealing with cross-chain bridges. And look, at a personal level, CreDA is about to launch on 3 new chains.
Cool. That's awesome.
And so we're about to go on BSC, Ethereum mainnet, and the Elastos sidechain. And funnily enough, just maybe about 2 hours ago, I was speaking to our CTO, and we were speaking about the recent hack with Axie, and we're like, okay, how do we do this? Because our goal is CreDA is chain agnostic. You can get a user score and use it on any protocol, across all of Web3. We want to create the trust layer across Web3. So we were thinking, okay, how do we do this? Do we mint the same number of tokens on the different chains, and then use a cross-chain bridge or a provider that will lock it up in their own smart contracts? Do you implement a burn mechanism? Do you do something in between? And it's something that needs serious thought. One, to make sure that we do it right, but ultimately, how do you do it in such a way that it doesn't expose our underlying token holders or those individuals that are interacting with our protocol? We have some ideas. I don't necessarily know what the right answer is. There's different ways of doing it, but I do think it does need to be addressed, and a lot of focus needs to be put on it, because we talk about Web3, the metaverse, but the metaverse is only really going to exist if all the different protocols can interact with one another at some layer, and you're going to need that cross-chain bridge. So I agree, we should definitely put a spotlight on it. We're very keenly looking at it from a personal perspective in terms of how our protocol rolls out, but 2, also, when we're constructing our credibility score on users and the different protocols. So I couldn't agree more.
Cool, man. Well, hey, this has been an awesome chat. I really appreciate you coming on to talk a little bit about what you guys are working on. I think it's a really cool cause. I think it's a good thing to work towards. Really excited to see you guys continuing to expand out onto more and more blockchains and working together in the future. And man, just thank you so much for a really great chat. This has been awesome.
No, likewise. Thanks for having me. I need to ask Julian. Every time I speak, but second time we've spoken on camera, you seem to have like the most awesome webcam. You need to let me know what it is. That the quality of the picture is amazing.
Oh, good. Okay.
Share in
I'll
the
bring it.
description. I'm sure others want to know what it is.
No, you know what? My good friend, business partner, teammate Mike, he's got this like saying he's been bringing up a lot, and that's basically he's been saying that the webcam is the modern suit. It's like you can wear a t-shirt if you have a good camera, a good mic. That's like wearing like a nice suit. That's like the new suit of today. That's like the suit of work from home. And I like love that. That's actually such a good point.
Actually, it's really good.
It's a good concept because it comes across well, and I think it means it. You know, it's a cool aspect. It's a cool way of thinking it through, and I like it. So yeah, man, I'll definitely post some of the links below. Cool. Well, thank you so much, man. You have a great rest of your week, and for everybody out there that's tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in, and yeah, we'll catch y'all next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.